and recording is live for the very first episode of our brand new podcast platform, the TFD Performance Podcast. Kicking it off is someone that, if you follow our other platform, the Fight Science Podcast, you'll be very, very familiar with this man, Dr. Ian Dunican. Dr. Ian, thanks for coming on, mate.
Well, thank you. With that very auspicious title, I should talk like this for the rest of the podcast episode.
I was going to say...
As I'm the inaugural guest, I should talk with a posh English accent, shall I?
You know, what was funny is when I was writing, obviously we pre-record our introduction. I remember the first time I had you on the Fight Science Podcast it was a few years ago now, because I remember I was sitting in Auckland in New Zealand and I was writing your introduction and I was just going, Jesus freaking Christ. I was like, fuck this guy. Like, what has this guy not done? And then it was just the longest introduction. And then as I was redoing it for this one, I was going, it's gotten bigger. Like there's more that's gotten to it. He's got his black belt. And then, as we were just saying, I found out more things when I was writing this introduction for you than I did that one. And I want to ask you about this straight off the bat. I didn't know you used to run the ultra marathons. And if everyone's been following me, obviously I've been posting a lot about my training, getting ready for ultra marathon. I'm getting ready for my first one. I didn't know this. You've done what, 20 odd or so?
Yeah, over 20. Yeah.
And you've done Leadville, one of what is renowned in the ultra world as one of the most prestigious and biggest ones. You've done it, what, twice?
Yeah.
Jeez.
Yeah. Man, let me just preface all this by saying, right, that I'm a fucking idiot, first of all. Okay. Everything that I was bad at as a kid has become my childhood. My childhood negative aspects of my character have become my adult attributes. Ian is talkative. Ian can't sit still. Ian does too many things. Ian can't concentrate on one thing. Ian wants to not be in the classroom. Ian wants to be doing 15 things. If Ian just could settle down and focus, he might be good at one thing, but he can't. And all those things have become my adult attributes because, like you said, Jordan, I do lots of random shit, but it's all out of pure interest and love. My whole goal now in my life is to do something that I like. And the minute I stop liking it, I will just change tact and do something else because I just really want to, I'm not experiencing things for a collection of a list. I'm experiencing things because I want to really test my character in all different ways, physical and cognitive. That's all I'm trying to do, is see how far I can push this meat wagon.
Yeah, and I dare say that you're getting to the point where maybe push a little bit less because you're making the rest of us feel a bit bad. Recently, BJJ
Hold on a
Black
minute. Hold on a minute, man. Look at the color of my hair. Look at the color of yours. Don't be fucking telling me to calm down.
I think I'm not too far off, to be honest. I spotted a gray the other day, and I thought, no, this is not good signs. This is not good signs for my age. But anyway, Dr. Ian, we'll get into it because
that's right. I got my black belt before Christmas, but I want to preface that again by saying I'm very much an amateur recreational roller. Don't think that I'm going to be in there like grappling with UFC athletes or tearing up on the circuit with Craig Jones and Lachlan Giles. I am far from. I'm more likely to laugh before I'll to do anything else.
Still a big achievement, but we'll get into it, Dr. Ian, because I want to break this down. I want to go back to basics because, again, for you guys that follow my platform, you guys know I would have spoken a lot to Ian. I've reposted his work all the time. Ian is our go-to guy when it comes to sleep and performance, and he's helped me countless times with our athletes when we're traveling across different time zones. He's getting their training schedule and everything in time. He's one of the best at what he does when it comes to sleep and performance. I want to break this down and get a bit more practical and go, okay, let's start at the basics with just basic sleep science. And I'd love for you to just break this down and give us as in-depth as you like, Ian, for these answers. But yeah, I want to go back and just talk about this because I think a lot of people, there's a misconception of what actually goes on when we sleep and why is it so important. It's a conversation I have with athletes all the time. Can you break it down? When we're sleeping, what's actually going on in our mind? What's going on in our body?
Yeah, it is interesting, isn't it? Because we spend approximately, or we should be spending approximately a third of our life actually asleep. And I often say to people, start with your life in its totality. And it's like, roughly about a third of your time is spent working, another third of your time is spent sleeping, and the remainder then is, spent watching Netflix, jumping up and down in the bouncing castle or whatever else you like to do. Kind of that rest time and play time. But if we take that sleep component, what we've been seeing over, the last sort of 40 or 50 years since sleep science or sleep medicine has emerged as a discipline, and then chronobiology, more what I kind of do in human chronobiology, we're seeing actually people getting less and less sleep. which is quite interesting because you would think like as we kind of evolve or over time that we would get more sleep, we'd optimize it more. And then other people would say, whoa, well, that's because we've evolved so quickly, we don't need so much sleep. And the two of those things are actually incorrect. But to come back to your question about what's actually happening. So let's look at sleep. Basically, when we go to bed at nighttime and we open our eyes in the morning and get up, there's a couple of things that are happening. You may have heard about REM sleep and non-REM sleep and different stages and so on of sleep that occur. And so basically, let's say we'll take the kind of an average scenario. Someone goes to bed at 10:30 at night, they fall asleep at 11 and they wake up at 7 in the morning. When you go to sleep, you actually go through different sleep stages or sleep phases. So the first thing I'll say is there's two kind of phases of sleep, if you want to call it that. One will be non-REM sleep, and the other then will be REM sleep, rapid eye movement. And so with each of those phases, then they can be subcategorized. So non-REM sleep can be subcategorized into stage 1, 2, and 3. Now, stage 1 and 2 are light sleep. So this is what people would say, oh, I'm a very light sleeper. That would be like I spend more time in this period of sleep. Stage 3 is actually deep sleep. Most people say that REM sleep is deep sleep. That's a complete misnomer. It's not. Deep sleep is stage 3. And then you have REM sleep, rapid eye movement, is when you're asleep. Now, if we brought somebody into a laboratory and put all those electrodes all over their head and over their body, that's called polysomnography. That's the gold standard for assessing sleep. A lot of people say, well, how in the name of God am I supposed to sleep with all that stuff on me? That's kind of like nearly like doing a blood test. We just want to see what's going on, if there's any kind of sleep problems or sleep disorders. And there's over 70 recognized sleep disorders, which people are often horrified to hear. So 70 recognized by the American Academy of Sleep Medicine. So a lot of times the laboratory-based stuff is trying to look at the prevalence of those sleep disorders, sleep problems with somebody. So each one of those stages of sleep is characterized by different sort of things that are happening in the brain, in the body, and respiration. So there's a very stringent criteria that we must look at to classify you as being in stage 1 sleep, stage 2, stage 3, and REM sleep. It's not some sort of subjective thing where we're looking into a CCTV camera and going, he's asleep, he's dreaming, he's awake, oh, he's good. That's not what happens. We can actually monitor 5 people at one time in a laboratory with one person. And we wouldn't even need to look at a camera. We can actually look at the signals coming off the brain. And that's what we would look at, and off the body. And I could actually sit in the laboratory and go, he's in stage 1 sleep, he's awake, she's in REM, and he's having, an obstructive sleep apnea event. We can actually look at all that through all these kind of trace panels on a screen. It's often like looking at the Matrix, which looks kind of crazy initially, but once you get to work it out, it's quite easy. So stage 1 sleep and stage 2 sleep, these non-REM periods in stage 3, these are really what's important for physical repair and recovery. Whereas REM sleep is really important for psychological repair and recovery. So one is kind of like updating the hardware and one's updating the software. So non-REM for the hardware and REM for the software. Predominantly, if we take that example of someone going to bed at 10:30, maybe it takes about half an hour to fall asleep at 11, predominantly in the first half of their sleep period, for the first maybe 3 or 4 hours, predominantly they will be in non-REM sleep. But they will oscillate in and out of different sleep stages. So they might go 1, 2, 3, jump into REM for 15 minutes and then be back into 1, then go straight down to 3. So it can be very erratic of how this operates. Towards the back end of the night, you would predominantly have REM or dreaming sleep. So this is what happens when people wake up, early in the morning. I've just had a crazy dream. As they're getting up to get into the shower, it's predominantly REM periods at the back end of the night. So that's really kind of what's going on from a kind of a health point of view. Now, when we sleep during the day, if we're a night shift worker or we've been up all night or we've been traveling, those sleep stages obviously can be severely disrupted. We are what's called diurnal animals. We are meant to be awake during the day and asleep at night. It is virtually impossible for us to flip around our whole circadian biology and become, a nighttime person and basically be awake all night and sleep all during the day. Very, very few people can do that in even shift work environments. And it takes stringent control of light and dark cycles, the timing of food and so on, and the stimulus of activity throughout the day as well. So you have to be very, very, and the use of caffeine, alcohol, and so on, has to be very tightly controlled. And very few people can even just cope with that sort of extreme night shift work. And nobody's been able to flip around their biology and basically be completely a night person and sleep during the day and have perfect sleep. People might do it over time and cope with it, but they're not optimizing their performance. You're not going to see an elite athlete working, full-time night shift type of thing, or training all through the night. It's not going to happen.
Not a good one anyway.
Well, you look, here's an example, actually. Myself and Sonny Brown, who people might know from the Sonny Brown Breakdown, we wrote an article a couple of years ago on BJJ Scout, and it was around the time Tony Ferguson had, he was wearing his, I think he said his prescription sunglasses inside, and he tripped over something and hurt himself. I would speculate that Tony would, really benefit from, and he's a complete animal to train, and I'm not disparaging the athlete in any shape, way, or form. He's an unbelievable athlete, an unbelievable fighter. But Tony did some things that may not have been conducive to adequate recovery, such as going running at 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning with a log on his shoulder, and doing crazy things and throwing bars around and all of these things where his body should have been sleeping. Maybe if he was sleeping and did that training during daylight hours to optimize himself, that may have been better and more conducive to adequate recovery. Because we see when people are awake at night, doing these sort of, sleep deprivation periods or operating at these time of days, there's what's called a diurnal effect. And basically your speed, your reaction time, and your strength are all going to be compromised at this time.
Can we dive back into that, Dr. Ian? I think it's a good segue into this part and talking about the importance of light dark for the sleep-wake cycle. Can you just break down as simple as you can the science of it, and then why, like you're saying, why is that important for, say, someone like an athlete or a shift worker? Why do they need to know about that?
Yeah, I think it's actually really important, Jordan, for anybody, regardless of the activity you're doing. Most people in the world have a brain. And so when inside, I said most, but inside that brain, they're at the base of the hypothalamus, there's a little small cluster of cells called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, or the SCN for short. Really what that is the body clock. When people say my body clock is off, this is what's off. This is a small cluster of cells about the size of your small fingernail that sits in there. Now, this SCN regulates everything within the body in terms of circadian rhythms. This is like the master clock. So everything has taken its cue from this. We now know from circadian biology that your lungs, your digestive system, your respiratory system, everything is on these kind of, miniature or peripheral clocks throughout the body that are all synchronized by the SCN. The SCN is synchronized by light and dark cycles. Really what's happening is light is being absorbed through the eye. It sends a signal back to the SCN. The SCN then sends an inhibitory signal to the pineal gland, which you may have heard on Joe Rogan. And the pineal gland is where melatonin is released endogenously or internal to the body. And so when you have light being sort of coming into your eyes, natural light, melatonin won't be released during the day. That allows for cortisol, a stress hormone, to be released during the day. And basically you can get around and be active throughout the day. Now, in the absence of light at nighttime, that's when we don't have light coming in. That's when we can actually allow melatonin to be secreted, and we can have the onset of sleep at nighttime. So it's not that the dark is sending a signal into it, it's just the absence of light sending a signal. And this is really what controls us. This is also what's responsible for people being screwed up with shift work. This is jet lag. This is what controls the jet lag. So in other words, this is why you're affected. So Jordan, you go back and forth to the US quite a bit. From the east coast of Australia, you probably go to somewhere like Los Angeles and then travel into Vegas from there, or into Dallas, those type of places. You're going in an easterly direction. That's really difficult to do. That's the hardest way to go. Where west is easier to adapt because of the light and dark cycles. So when you land, let's say, typically those flights get into Los Angeles like 6, 7 o'clock in the morning. Mm-hmm. Your body actually thinks it's nighttime. You should be going to sleep, but you're getting blasted with light. And you're getting really kind of disoriented and disruptive. You feel sleepy, but you're getting all these light signals. And then because of you being probably awake on the flight, because they're normally a daytime flight, you're feeling quite hungry. So your leptin and ghrelin, your appetite regulating hormones are all over the place. You're hungry when you shouldn't be eating, and you're just completely desynchronized. And so a general rule of thumb is for every one time zone you cross, it will take you one day to get used to it. So what we have to do then, and obviously you may be aware of some of our work in an international consensus paper that we wrote recently on travel fatigue and jet lag. And some of the work I actually do as the advisor to the McLaren Formula One team is we want to minimize those negative effects of jet lag really, really quickly. And the first thing we have to do is manipulate light and dark cycles before they go, when they travel, and when they arrive. And that is the biggest way to adapt to travel fatigue and jet lag, and for shift work disorder. But in the context of fighters or athletes, this is really important to synchronize people to time of day for competition, because we want to try and get people ready for fights, let's say at midnight after a title contender like an Israel Adesanya or Conor McGregor used to stay up late. Michael Bisping was another one that used to do the same thing as well. So we have to optimize them for the time of day using light and dark cycles. And it's the same in shift work as well. It's understanding the light and dark cycles across time And then as we move away from the equator and we go sort of the northern hemisphere into these far remote places of Canada or Norway, this becomes more hard because we get very few hours of daylight in the winter, and then we have extended hours of daylight in the summer, up to 20 hours or more. So all these factors become very they're key inputs into managing sleep.
I was going to say, when you mentioned there with the winter, and I lived in Canada for quite a few years, and that was the one thing coming from Queensland, Australia. We have light 360 days of the year, I'd say, pretty much all the time. And then going and living in Canada and having winters that were sometimes 4 months long, that was one of the most wild experiences. Does all of this play a role into that as well? And how would that, just the natural, if you're staying in the same time zone, the same place, and then say you're going through these winters where it is quite literally dark. I remember I used to wake up at, the sun would come up, maybe poke its head up at 9 a.m. and then it'd come up for maybe a few hours and it was back down by 3 p.m. And then you had the nighttime again. And it was mostly always foggy and miserable. And how much does that play a role in these light dark cycles?
Where did you live, Jordan?
I lived in Toronto, and then I lived up in the Rocky Mountains in a little town called Jasper.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. So Toronto, I used to go to Montreal quite a bit for work, and I used to go up to Labrador as well, in Labrador, Newfoundland province, up to Labrador, and that was quite interesting because I left here actually one time in the middle of March from Western Australia, and it was 40 degrees Celsius, and then when I arrived in Labrador, it was minus 40, so quite extreme in temperature. But you do raise a very interesting point that across the year, sleep will change. So we generally see in those type of areas that sleep in the summer will actually decrease because of light. But it's also probably social activities as well. Like you go to Montreal in the middle of summer, 2 a.m. is like 2 p.m. People are out on the streets, they're out and they're drinking, they're having food, they're driving around, and it's really nice weather. It's Montreal in the summer is like probably one of the best places in the world. Go to Montreal in the winter. You want to put a bullet in your head. It's just depressing. Everything is boarded up. It's absolutely freezing. I remember one time, circling back to ultramarathons, I was staying in Montreal and I went for a run, and it was minus 20, and I had to get a 20K run in. And when I came back, I had a bit of a longer beard. It was actually frozen and it cracked and was breaking off bits. And I got a really bad respiratory infection from inhaling the air. But also I brought 2 water bottles on a waist belt thing. And halfway around, of course, I went to go take a drink and they were frozen because I was like, so used to like living in Perth and being so warm and running in this weather. So it gets obviously quite cold. So you're right. The lack of that light throughout those winter periods kind of what's called seasonal affective disorder for people. So it can cause depressive symptoms. It can cause like anxiety, lethargy. People won't train as good, not getting as much vitamin D, which we now see is linked to lots of issues in terms of health. And so some people in those places actually use what's called a light box. So it's actually giving them actual light throughout the day. So it's a high lux to basically help them feel better or synchronize in that area over time. And the other thing I would say to people in those areas is make sure like you're getting as much natural light as possible. So you're opening up, curtains and blinds throughout the day to allow as much natural light in as possible. And get as much natural light as possible as you can. The other thing that helps people as well, we've seen from studies. We're going to have Sean Kane on soon talking about this from Monash University on my podcast, Sleep for Performance, where basically the more early morning sunlight exposure you get, the better it's going to be for your sleep. So people go, wait, now I go for a coffee at 7. You're telling me to get sunlight then because it's going to help me sleep at night. That's like 13 hours apart. Why am I doing that? But we now know that early morning sunlight exposure helps regulate that circadian system for light and dark cycles and basically gets you kind of tuned in straight away. So one of the things that people could do, regardless of athlete or non-athlete, is in the morning when you're going to get your coffee is don't wear sunglasses for the first 20 minutes, half an hour. Allow that natural light to kind of seep into your eyeballs. And it's really good for synchronization of circadian sleep and wake cycles, and also massive reduction in depression symptoms.
Wow. Does it go the other way, Dr. Dunican? Does it go at nighttime? Say, is there an ideal time when you want to be dark and you want to be staying away, say, from artificial light or anything like that?
Yeah, so this depends on what's called a chronotype, and you may have heard about this before. So we've got 3 types of chronotypes. We have owls, those who like to go to bed late and get up late. We have larks who like to go to bed early and get up early. And then we have intermediates, those in the middle that can be generally influenced by the factors that or the location that they're in. And so for those people in those different chronotypes, we're going to have different kind of characteristics associated with them. Owl chronotypes are generally more better at managing night shift work, or when they're on an evening swing or a night swing, they're better at managing that, where larks wouldn't be. And the opposite of that is true as well. Larks are better at working early in the morning and getting up early in the morning, whereas owls will be like zombies getting up at 6 in the morning. So this is something we have to take into account. We also have to take into account what's called a wake maintenance zone, or the forbidden zone. This is the time roughly between 6 and 9 o'clock at night, where it's the hardest time in a 24-hour for people to sleep. Anthropologists suspect this is a hangover from the time we were Stone Age people living in caves, smoking weed, because weed was legal. And we were getting chased by saber-toothed tigers. We would have to be kind of ultra vigilant when the sun went down, because we would become prey. And that's kind of a hang up still in our biology today. You may experience this if you work Monday to Friday and you're in the office and you're just going, oh man, when I go home this evening, I'm just having something to eat and I'm going straight to bed. I'm so tired. And then you're driving home at around 5:30, 5:45, you're feeling actually quite pumped up, you're feeling energetic, and you're like, oh, actually, I feel pretty good. I must work with a bunch of assholes. And when I get away from them, I actually feel quite good. But that's actually, you're starting to enter into this wake maintenance zone or forbidden zone. So it's very hard for people to sleep during this time. It's actually the hardest time in a 24-hour period for people to sleep. So these factors have to be considered when we're talking about light and dark cycles as well. But with that in mind, depending on your chronotype, then you will need to avoid light, lots of light prior to that. But the other factor across on top of this, Jordan, that's been coming out since we last spoke, is light sensitivity. And this comes back to Sean Kane and Monash. Some people are extremely sensitive to light at nighttime and others aren't. So some people basically do not like any sort of like indoor ceiling light on. They want soft lights in the background. And you can basically kind of assess this yourself, because it kind of correlates pretty well with the data. If you don't like having big lights on, or kind of fluorescent lights on in the kitchen, you'll probably have some sort of light sensitivity. And the more light that you're exposed to before bed, the worse that's going to be for your sleep. Whereas other people are completely fine. They can be in a disco, turn off the light, and they can go straight to sleep. So we generally say to people to, avoid light or lots of light in the hour or half an hour before you go to bed. Now, this often gets misconstrued as like, electronic devices are bad for your sleep. It's actually all light sources are really bad. And the other thing on electronic devices, while we're on this subject, the literature is mixed on this. People have this idea that electronic devices are bad for your sleep, and all the research shows that. Well, actually, it doesn't. It's actually split down the middle. It's a 50-50 split on some research. Matt Walker, who wrote the book Why We Sleep, has recently come out in the last couple of days and actually said he's changed his mind after looking at all the studies about electronic devices and sleep. And rightly so, because I've done some research in this area, and there is no pronounced signal showing that electronic devices affect sleep. The studies that have come out previously have shown a statistical difference. So, for example, Jordan, we both might be in a study. You're exposed to electronic devices. It takes you 15 minutes to fall asleep from electronic devices. I don't have an electronic device. I fall asleep in 9 minutes. Okay. Statistically significant from a stats point of view, clinically relevant? No, it's not. Because if most people fall asleep in 10 to 20 minutes, maximum 30 minutes before we even start worrying about insomnia for sleep onset. So yes, stats are one thing, but relevance is another thing. And this is something that I think a lot of people need to look at with data anyway in today's modern world. Just because somebody says something is bad, you need to look at the next level down. And unfortunately, there's been a lot of media hype about electronic devices, and some laboratories around the world have used this to kind of, get a lot of airtime for it. But the practical application is not really relevant. Yes, there's a difference, but it's not really relevant. I actually suspect, and from some of the work with individual athletes or in teams, is it's actually more about the type of activity you go before you go to bed. So, Jordan, for you, me and you, scrolling through Instagram, looking at silly videos and memes is like funny, makes us kind of relax and we're chilled out. For another person, going to bed and reading an engineering manual might actually stimulate them and make them feel, quite, engaged. Or somebody starts going, I'm going to bed at 10 o'clock. It's 9:45. I'm just going to check my emails before I go to bed. And then they get an email from their boss going, oh, hey, Jordan, the numbers you put in the spreadsheet were wrong. I've got some questions. You're like, oh, I'll fucking show him. Get the spreadsheet out. Next minute you're back in. You go, oh, fuck, I made a mistake. I need to redo the spreadsheet. Next minute it's 11 o'clock at night. So that's kind of, I think, where we're seeing more of an issue with people individually, as opposed to these group data studies around electronic devices and the impact of light on sleep, which comes down to more behavioral changes, I think, about not engaging in work before sleep. And I think this is something that's actually got worse during the pandemic, because people have this idea, oh, you're staying at home, you know, you're sort of on tap 24/7. And that's why countries like, I think, France and maybe Spain, or was it Belgium, maybe, but definitely France, have brought in rules where like you can't contact workers outside of certain hours. It's illegal to do so, to give people actual space.
Oh, it's definitely a thing. I think even when you wake up in the morning, I remember I went through a real period of this when workers, and you run businesses, you know what it's like. And there's always all this demand when you roll over. And if you check your phone and there's, you know, not a message that you want to be receiving at 6, 7 a.m. when you wake up, and you feel it, you feel your body, you feel your blood pressure go up, you feel your stress, and it's just not good for you. Before we get onto this, Dr. Ian, behavioral changes, you triggered a thought there. And this is something I see with not even my athletes. A lot of our business clients have really jumped on this as well. And I want to get your opinion, because my opinion on this is that I think these new wearable devices, although yes, they can give some good data, in my experience, I've found that this just it's almost like it adds an extra level of stress to these guys when they're wearing them. It's like, it becomes a focus and almost a competition of how much quality sleep they can get and how long they can spend in these different stages. And then that focus and that attention and energy that's being put towards that is almost detrimental to their sleep. And for an example, I have a client that used to do this all the time. I ultimately made him throw it out because he would wake up in the middle of the night and check his sleep device to see if he was sleeping properly. What's your thoughts on these devices? Are they accurate? If they are accurate, is the data useful? How is the data useful? Give us your thoughts.
I'll give you my thoughts and then I'll give you the science. So my thoughts is, I'm gonna start with this. Jordan, one of the biggest things you would have seen in the diet and nutrition world is people grappling with body fat and body mass. Yeah. So many people try to lose weight. We've had weighing scales out since I was born in the 70s. Do you think people have got slimmer since we had more weighing scales, or got fatter?
Fatter, for sure.
Exactly. And it's the same thing as well, is people think by having a wearable device that it's going to help them sleep, right? And so people often view this thing as this magic bullet or silver bullet that's like, oh, I can't tell you how many times people go to me, oh yeah, what do you think about this sleep and that sleep? Yeah. And I start talking, and then 4 minutes into it, they're like, I have a Fitbit. I'm like, okay. So like, what the fuck? Like, what are you asking me if you're screaming at me about a Fitbit? Like, you know, so people get kind of obsessed with these devices. So I think one is, we need to, when we look at any sort of device, whether it be wearable or any sort of like thing you're going to put in your body in any shape, way or form, or stick on your forehead or your ass cheeks, whatever it is for sleep, we need to understand what it is it valid, and what is it going to do? Because I think people think that when they put on one of these type of devices, and look, I always play around with these devices, I'm always looking at them and I use them, but in the constraints of what they're good for. When I use these devices, I'm very clear with people about what they do and what's the information, and then how we can inform behavioral change or any other sort of change we have to do. So the latest science shows, when we look at these wearable devices, that they are getting better overall, right? And let's break the data into two kind of parts for sleep. Obviously, there's sleep and nutrition and physical activity and so on. But let's look at the sleep part. The sleep part is to give you what's called, we'll say derived variables: time at sleep onset, time you woke up. And then it's looking at the difference in those times from those 2 time points, about how much sleep you had, how much wake after sleep onset you had, which is like the number of awakenings you've had, how long it took you to fall asleep, and so on. For those type of measures, these devices are actually not too bad. And when we look at all devices out in the market at the moment, if I look at the latest research by Evan Chinoy, who works with the US military doing research in their research department, and another guy, Jason or Jake Stone, Jay Stone anyway, he looked at this as well. The best device on the market at the moment is the Fitbit. The Fitbit is the number 1 device, and down the end of it is probably the Garmin, and the Aura is probably sitting mid-pack. Like these are kind of how these devices stack up. And that's currently. That might change in 6 weeks as well. We don't know. But currently, from the research I've seen, the Fitbit is probably the best one at measuring sleep duration. Now, when it comes to sleep stages, remember I spoke earlier on, Jordan, about polysomnography, wiring people up with all those things around their eyes, their chin, their mouth, respiratory signals. That's actually the gold standard for sleep stages. We need EEG on the head, say, look at brainwave activity. We need EOG on the eye, and we need EMG on the chin. We need that minimum. So sleep stages from a wearable device are using heart rate heart rate variability to infer the sleep stages. They are wildly inaccurate across all of these devices. So when I work with an athlete, I actually say to them, or when I work with companies, do not look at the sleep stages. If you come to me and say, I want to get in 5% REM and 10% this, I won't even listen to you. I won't even acknowledge the email. I won't even listen. You can say what you want, but you might as well be screaming into the ether, because I'm not going to listen to it, because these devices are crap for sleep stages. More importantly, if I'm assessing somebody and they come to me and say, I only got 15% deep sleep last night and I should be getting 20, my next question would be, what are you going to do tonight that's different, that's going to affect that? Like in diet nutrition, you can like look at calories in, calories out. We can maybe look at increase in physical activity versus, you know, what's in as well. Maybe we can add some strength training to increase muscle mass. We can pull on a few variables. But in sleep, what can we do for deep sleep? Tell me how I can increase that. The other thing as well is people have this idea from some information that came out a few years ago from one paper that said, the paper said, in general, most sleep cycles last 90 minutes in general. Again, like you can't apply that to people because sleep cycles will change across the week, depending on the training load, depending on travel, depending on a whole host of factors as well. Those sleep cycles will wildly change. And it was just like on average. And we all know that when we look at average stuff, we're not actually getting real information over. So I would say on wearables, be very careful about what you expect from a wearable, because it will not improve your sleep. It will give you the data in the short term and the long term to help you make those behavioral changes. The other thing I'd say as well, Jordan, is that there's no point in getting up in the morning and going, I only got 4 hours sleep last night. That's it. I'm ruined. What am I going to do today? I'm freaking out, particularly for athletes. You need to be looking at your last 21-day average. That's what you should be looking at. And those apps are quite good at, like, giving like the last 7 days, you slept like 7 hours, 20 minutes. If your sleep on average is in that 7 to 9 hour window, you're doing pretty good. You're in that 95% of people that are doing it. So don't freak out. I worked with an individual athlete. I'm working with an individual athlete at the moment in baseball. He wore an Oura ring. When we did polysomnography with him and we had him wear the Oura ring, the polysomnography was showing his true sleep. The Oura ring was overestimating his wake after sleep onset, or his awakening times, by up to 90 minutes a night. So this athlete thought he had a sleep problem, but he really didn't. What he had was a device issue that was overestimating his wake time. And so by removing that Oura ring from him and using polysomnography as the gold standard, then setting him up with a Fitbit, we were actually able to show how much sleep he truly was getting, which lowered his anxiety about the amount of sleep that he was getting, because all of a sudden now he's increased his sleep by nearly, an hour a night from just changing over a device. So sometimes that can cause more angst. Now, I'm not picking on Oura ring. That's just an example. Oura ring might be better for other people than Fitbits. But all I'm saying is just be very careful, whatever device you're using. You need to look at long-term averages and long-term trends before you make changes. Waking up in the morning and going, freaking out over 5 hours, or a Garmin or other device telling you you're not ready to go, or a Whoop. Like, you need to take in other variables, how you feel, where you are in your training cycle. Don't let your life be run by a Fitbit. Just like I said to people in business, don't let your business strategy be run by what emails are in your inbox in the morning. You need to put some stringent plans and rules in place and use that data to help you, not be led by the data itself.
Say, Ian, if there was a person, say it was a business person, say it was an athlete, say it was just an everyday person getting up and they're going, okay, I want to get the best out of myself. Say they've got a Fitbit and then they're still using the Fitbit. And say if that data coming back and they're going, you know what, I'm actually sleeping all right by the numbers on that, but I'm just waking up and I'm not feeling rested. I think this is an area that is not spoken about nearly enough in any capacity, and that's sleep disorders. Where do you draw the line where someone is, say they're waking up and they're feeling unrested, or maybe they can say, oh, maybe I just had a big day yesterday. Maybe, I've been training a lot. I've been stressed at work, whatever. Where do you draw the line and say, okay, maybe there's something else we need to look into, and maybe you should go talk to someone like yourself? Where is that line?
Yeah, there is no line per se, but I'll answer this question in two ways. So when I deal with individual people, there's three things I look at. Any wearable data that I have a system where I aggregate that data and look at it online. I'm able to kind of tap into their back-end data to be wearing a wearable for a long time. The second thing is I will send them a survey, which looks at the potential prevalence of these most commonly known sleep disorders. Like I was saying, there's over 70 of them. And the third thing then is, Jordan, I would spend like, up to an hour on Zoom with them individually, going through, their background and engaging with the person. Because as we know, when you engage with an athlete or individual or a business person, we find out what's driving them, what their goals are. Because, someone who's 29 trying to be a managing director or CEO is vastly different from somebody that's 63 going, look, I got to get through these last 2 years and I'm retired, my super's up, and I just want to get out the door. Vastly different goals. And then when you start talking to people, you find out the difference between like, I got 5 kids, I got no kids, oh, my wife's a recovering alcoholic, my husband's a drug addict, we're fostering 20 kids, whatever it might be. There's a whole host of variables that comes in that we need to basically account for. And so all those things are really key to look at. And once we have all that information, then we can recommend the next course of action. I often say to people, I'm not going to give you the perfect solution, but I'm going to be like the guide. I'm going to be like I'm going to be like Frodo in Lord of the Rings. I'm going to bring you to where you have to be to throw that ring into that fire. But, we might have to get you to go to a sleep physician who specializes in the assessment and diagnostic of sleep disorders, because that can only be diagnosed by a sleep physician. What I can do is say, you have a high prevalence of this sleep disorder, and all your data suggests that. Now, from some of the work that we've been doing in the industry and athletes, I'm about 95% accurate in that at the moment. So I got a pretty good strike rate. We released a study, Jordan, last year, which was called Digging for Data in the Mining Industry. It was the world's biggest study done in mining to date. We looked at shift work and fly in, fly out. And we had 88 people in the study. And just to give people an idea with these sleep disorders, we had 44% of that group having shift work disorder, so an inability to cope or have challenges with managing shift. 6% had potentially clinical insomnia, and 30% of them had obstructive sleep apnea. Now, we measured their sleep with wearable devices, and what's interesting is when we start looking at correlations with this data and mixed modeling and statistical analysis, is that for OSA, for every unit of BMI, body mass index, which is a calculation by height and weight that many people might be aware of, not body fat, when BMI increased, basically, we had an association here with OSA. So we found that for every 1 year increase in age, so as we got older, the odds of OSA increased by 6%.
Wow. And
for every 1 unit increase in BMI, the percentage of OSA increased by 19%. So you can imagine, if you're a 40-year-old male, your BMI is about 32, which is not too uncommon in mining. You've now really kind of increased your potential prevalence of having obstructive sleep apnea. And then on top of that, if you're a male, you're more at risk than a female. So you're like over 30 BMI, you're 40 years of age, for example, and you're a male and you're doing shift work as well. You've got all the wrong sort of things in front of you for developing obstructive sleep apnea. And obstructive sleep apnea is basically when people, when they're asleep, are not getting enough oxygen into their system. Their oxygen desaturation falls, carbon dioxide levels builds up, causes an awakening in the brain. You may not even be cognizant of it, but your brain kind of wakes up, has this disruption in the EEG, and then you might wake up gasping or snoring, and that's causing these micro awakenings throughout the night, which is called wake after sleep onset, and that's what's ruining your sleep. So you might be in bed for 10 hours, but you might only be sleeping 6 hours because you're waking up so much throughout the night. So this is really interesting when we start looking at the wearable data, the questionnaires around the prevalence, and we talk to somebody. These are the type of things that we look at. And on top of this, we had a media release just go out this morning on this, where we looked at ultramarathon swimmers who swam to Rottnest Island, which is a 20K swim. And we found there as well that body mass index, and these swimmers generally try to gain weight so they can swim in the open water. But we actually found that the bigger they got, it was actually associated with a decline in sleep as well. So every unit increase in BMI, their sleep went down by 5 minutes. So if you're comparing a person with a BMI of, let's say, 25 compared to a BMI of 35, that's 50 minutes of sleep a night. So nearly an hour gone down. And we also found as well that the swimmers with a high risk of OSA from our questionnaires had 21 minutes more awake overnight as well. So less sleep, more awakening, and 5% lower efficiency as well. So it's really interesting when we start looking at these things in the correlation with sleep, that maybe sleep disorders may be playing a bigger role in our ability to sleep compared to, lights, activity, or even behavior as well, because behavioral change is not going to actually affect sleep disorders. We have to actually treat them. And unfortunately, what's happening, Jordan, if we look at all the epidemiology data and stuff that's coming out of University of Chicago and other institutions across the world, is basically the heavier we get, unfortunately, the more sicker we're going to get in terms of sleep medicine issues around respiratory issues, because the more mass we carry, the worse we are, the less better we are, if you want to call it that, of actually utilizing oxygen overnight, because we basically have fat necks. That's really what's happening.
I've heard you talk about this before. And I think before we get in and we start talking about what sleep deprivation and these sleep disorders actually do when we're working, when we're training, whatever, I think it's important, and this is a good point for people to realize just how prevalent this is. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong with this, I'm sure you've said this to me, is it 1 in 5 everyday people have a sleep disorder, but with athletes, it's as high as 1 in 3 in some sports?
That's about right. That's from some of the research. So to my knowledge, I was the first person to do in laboratory sleep disorder testing in rugby players with 25 of them. And that's roughly right, Jordan. That's right. About 1 in 20 people will have a sleep disorder or sleep problem. And we found in our research about 1 in 3 athletes will. And I would say, Jordan, with individual athletes I'm dealing with at the top end, I'm actually finding 1 in 2 have a sleep disorder.
Holy smokes.
Yeah. And that's independent of BMI. There's no correlation with BMI. And one of the most prevalent ones I'm finding at the moment is obstructive sleep apnea in the supine position, which basically lying on your back is causing some really, really bad issues for athletes, regardless of how heavy they are. I'm talking about guys with like, some guys 8% body fat, BMI of like 20, 21, top end elite athletes, and they're having that on their back. So we have to get people off their back and onto their side. So we have positional treatment there. So that's positional treatment for obstructive sleep apnea. So I'm finding about 1 in 2 with individual athletes at the moment.
So let's take that and let's say, and I would say, yeah, you know what, if I'm thinking of my clients and the discussions we're having around sleep, yeah, I would say if you're onboarding a new client, probably half, if not more, would be reporting some disruption or something going on with their sleep. What is that? What does that equate to? So say we've gone through all of this. We've gone through the cycles. We've gone through how you're meant to be getting this light. We're diurnal animals. We need this structure. We're not meant to be up at night. Say that these athletes, these people, everyday people, they're experiencing, say, a sleep disorder. They're experiencing lack of deep sleep, lack of REM sleep. What happens? What are the performance metrics, or what happens in the body because of that?
Yeah, good question. And it's wildly variable across people. Again, and it depends on the sport and what's going on. So obviously, when we think about it from an everyday perspective from any human, sleep is a component of recovery. So I oftentimes, I'll draw a triangle, and the bottom of the triangle is time. And then we'll have like on one side of the triangle be like strength and conditioning or performance or training, and the other side is recovery. But as you know, Jordan, as well, it's probably like, it's a skewed triangle where it's like 90% strength and conditioning and human performance stuff, and about 10% or less on recovery. So we try to bring the balance back and have some more recovery. The number one part of that recovery system is really sleep. And it's interesting. I always say this as well. I had this conversation this morning with an ex-professional rugby player, Karen Longbottom. I said to Karen as well, it's interesting because people are quite happy to go and pay for cryotherapy, massage, get some sort of crazy boot put on them, buy a tablet, purchase something. But the one thing that's free, they don't want to do it, which is sleep. It seems to be always like impacted, which I find is actually quite strange. So I think, this focus on sleep needs to be front and center for a lot of people. And I think it needs to be, like you said, part of the onboarding. And I don't think people need to be working with someone like me day in, day out, or even week to week. But I think, once a year, start of a training camp, if you're a fighter, start of a season for a rugby team, whatever it might be, you want just to assess this at baseline, and then maybe have 1 or 2 measurements throughout the year, potentially, or a check-in, whatever. I like my kind of process is a very light touch with athletes. It's not very, you're not kind of every day getting emails off me and plans and stuff like that. So it's a very light touch. So you can make some big improvements in regard to just having that light touch around sleep and looking at these issues and putting an action plan in place. But the effect on performance is quite variable. I interviewed Liv Knowles last week. She's finishing her Ph.D. at Dunican, and she did a study over 8 or 9 days, taking muscle biopsies out of people's quad. Fair play to you for doing that. I wouldn't be in that study. And she looked at basically the impact from sleep restrictions of 5 hours sleep a night. What happens? And interesting enough, in her study, she found that it was lower body strength, leg strength that was significantly impacted. So basically, after the first night of 5 hours, you had this drop in performance in leg strength, so quads, glutes, and hamstrings, and then it stayed like that as well for the remaining time of sleep restriction. And I don't know about you, Jordan, but I often find when I'm getting tired, my legs get heavy. So this kind of correlates with how I feel, but there wasn't too much of a correlation with strength for upper body. So that's one thing we're seeing is impacting leg strength. The other one as well is if you look at some of the research that's come out of the US military with sleep restriction, which is like depriving people of a certain amount of time or even sleep deprivation for a whole night. I don't see too much difference in the variables in terms of VO2 max you see kind of a lot of, you don't see like kind of like if you sleep restrict people for 10 hours, we get this impact of VO2 max or this distance to 5K run. It's highly variable between people. What we do see though is a loss of accuracy. And so wild accuracy goes out the window after about 17 hours of total wakefulness. So accuracy, decision-making, reaction time, all being affected. So if I often think about that and react in terms of MMA, because I enjoy as an MMA fan and I train boxing twice a week as well. I enjoy doing that. And I think about that as well in terms of accuracy and speed and reaction time and so on. If you're tired, you travel across multiple time zones, you haven't optimized that right. That really could be the difference between you winning and losing that fight. You might have outperformed that person in a training camp, but your acute management of sleep in terms of travel or shift work or things like that, that might be the difference in your reaction time on that night. And I'm sure many, fighters, amateur and pro, probably have experienced this. And I'm sure other athletes in rugby missed a pass, dropped the ball, basketball players, people who shoot. All of these things can be really affected. That's where we probably see the biggest signal, decision-making and reaction time. And the longer it goes on, the worse it is. You spoke earlier on, Jordan, about doing ultra marathons. When I ran the Leadville 100 miler, which is at altitude, towards the end of that race. So the first year I actually didn't complete it. I got to 88 miles and dropped out. There was a whole host of things going on. My wife's mother had died back in Australia only a few days before the race. I didn't acclimatize long enough. I was staying in a shitty place. I couldn't cook my own food, blah, blah, blah. The next year I went back and did it. And I had all those variables under control, more time at altitude, had my own house, did my own diet, nutrition, and so on. But for the last 20 kilometers of that race, I was imagining I was running beside a wolf. And that wolf was as real as it was to me and you talking right now. When I got into the checkpoint, I was like, can someone look after that dog? Like some sort of wolf or something up in the mountains. Beautiful dog, been running along beside me. And as clear as day, Jordan, I still remember that dog as being real, or wolf, whatever it was. It looked like some sort of wolf thing to me. Beautiful dog, never forget it, but it wasn't real. So you will start hallucinating after time. So you will see things like this happening. I saw one guy on the side of the mountain of Leadville. He was walking the opposite way to me, running. I said, where are you going, man? I'm going to have a bath. I was like, it's no fucking bath. No, there's baths back here. And I'll have a nice hot bath and I'll be good to go. And then there was people at certain points patrolling the race on these quad bikes. I said to the guy on the quad bike, man, there's a guy down the road there. I said, like, he's wearing like a red beanie and a backpack thing, whatever. I said, go and talk to him because he's fucking lost it. He's going to have a hot bath. The guy was like, what? I was like, yeah, a hot bath. Where the fuck is he going to have a hot bath up here? I was like, man, he's gone. And then I saw the quad bike coming by and the guy was like hugging his back, sitting on the back. He was completely had lost it. And that's like calorie deficit, long time awake, altitude, all those variables. So there's an interaction between sleep restriction and sleep deprivation over time and how it affects people. And I'm sure military people would have the same thing as well. If you've been on long deployments or you go out on sort of a fighting patrol and you've been away for 36 hours, we see this happen as well. And you see this in military as well. It's called a blue on blue, friendly fire. This accounts for a number of people making these mistakes. So this is where sleep restriction and sleep deprivation can really affect performance. Unfortunately, in the research, we haven't got to the point where we're going, Jordan, you slept 6 hours, 48 minutes. That means your shooting accuracy in basketball is going to be impaired by 2%. So in the fourth quarter, you're going to not be able to, we haven't got to that level of granularity. And it's also important to know probably at this point that sleep research in athletes has really only taken off since 2010.
Wow.
And most people actually don't get funded. So most of the research, Jordan, I do is actually funded through my business. I don't get any funding.
Wow.
So no one's pumping money into looking at this.
Yeah. And isn't it crazy, right? And I know, like you said before, it is all encompassing, right? Like, especially And anyone that's run a decent distance can appreciate that and kind of see how funny that wolf story is. But it's all encompassing, right? It's your nutrition, it's your stress, it's sleep, it's everything. But sleep is that one thing. And like I said earlier, 1 and 2, I think, might even be undershooting it of how many athletes that we take on when you're onboarding. And it's like you said, it's almost like sleep is an afterthought for some reason. It's like they'll put all their eggs in all of these baskets, but then sleep is okay, what do I have left over? And I'll put it towards that.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's like it's the remainder, what's left over at the end of the day. And I think I've said this to you, Jordan, before. And I love watching embeddeds and countdown shows for UFC, not because I'm interested. Look, I'm interested in the fighters, but I'm always interested to see the practices outside the octagon. I'm really kind of slightly obsessed with what goes on outside and the mindset. And I know there's often bullshit on cameras and so on, but I've talked to enough people to know what goes on. And the number one thing, I think I've said this to you before, fighters' bedrooms. This whole thing in embeddeds and countdowns and people all sitting in the fighter's bedroom playing video games, hanging out. Like if that was me, I'd be like, get the fuck out of my room and stay out of my room. This needs to be my sanctuary for fight week. I'm stepping in at the end of this week for a title fight or a fight to get punched in the face in my underwear in front of millions of people. I don't need you invading my space. Your room should be like a shrine when you're in fight camp. Nobody should be able to enter that room. If the coach wants to have meetings or people want to play Xbox, go to someone else's room who's not fighting on the weekend. Go somewhere else. This whole kind of camping out in the room, people sleeping on floors in the fighter's room, to me, and I know people got to do it because of money stuff and all, but let them all sleep in the coach's room on the floor, not in the fighter's room. You need to be treating that fighter like a prince or a princess the week of the fight. This to me would have a massive improvement, I think, in sleep. And if you're a fighter and you like being surrounded by people, great. Go into the other room and be surrounded. But you need to be able at any time to be able to flip that switch and go back into your sanctuary and get ready, whether it be the wake up part, whether it be sleep, talk to family and friends. You need somewhere to retreat, to de-stress for these periods of time. And the amount of people I see on these embedded shows and countdown shows all sit in a room playing PlayStation, I'm like, oh man, this is not good.
It's funny you say that, and I'll give credit. And you know what? I think you played a large part in this, Ian, after conversations we had, and I relayed the information to Eugene Behrman, who's the head coach at City Kickboxing there. And we recently just went to Houston. And when we travel, we have quite a big crew with us, but we stayed in a big house. Exactly what you said. I remember Eugene came in a day later. So all the fighters, it was left up to the fighters to pick their rooms and do whatever. Yeah. And I remember I got in the day before, or the morning before Eugene and the other head coach got in. And we kind of all just grabbed couches and whatnot. And, you know, so we had something like a 10 bedroom place, but there's 16 people there. So obviously people are going to be out in the spaces. I remember when Eugene came in, the first thing he said is, this ain't happening. This is communal space. This is where we're going to hang out. Bedrooms are for sleeping. This is like you're in here. Like Israel, Carlos, and Bloods, who are fighting, own bedrooms up the back. That's their space.
Perfect.
Everyone's staying here. When we're coming here, everyone, if you want to chat, this is our area. And just came it. And I'm pretty, and like you've helped us a lot with our traveling jet lag. And it's one thing that Eugene's taken on. And it's true. You see it when you're on the ground there, and using that same example. I remember there was a time, and I think it was an embedded cameraman, I'm going to say, woke up one of our athletes before one of their fights. And me and another coach, when we kind of worked out the numbers, we thought he was in that final REM stage of his sleep, because he's a very much a night owl. We figured, you helped me figure that out, actually, very much a night owl. And we figured out that they woke him up during that last REM cycle. Then he went and had that fight that night. And me and one of the other coaches said, I wonder how much of a role that played in that loss, because it was very uncharacteristic. And looking back on film, I'm not going to say, and of course, there's so many factors that go into the result of a fight. But even looking at him, like he looked sluggish, like he never really woke up, and his reaction time, his cognition and everything else, for someone that is usually, I won't say who, but is pretty good and pretty close to unbeatable. It seemed that was the one thing that we pinned down, that we were like, wow, I wonder how much of a factor that played in. Yeah. And if I was a betting man, it's probably a fair bit.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think, Jordan, I think all those things, you think about Stoic philosophy, what's inside your control and what's outside of your control. These are things that are all inside a fighter's control and a coach's control. So fair play to Eugene for doing it, because a lot of head coaches want to be friends, and they're looking at this maybe like the money train, and they don't upset the fighters and the other fighters. But this is what's needed, is some leadership around this, and some leadership and rules, and a kind of what I would call nearly like a camp discipline. and day in, day out. We need some discipline around here because like Jocko says, discipline equals freedom. And it's true. We all got shitty things we don't like to do, and there's certain things we have to do, but it's kind of, it's I don't want to sound like a communist, but it's for the greater good, right? It's particularly when you're all together and you're working together, you need to have some of these rules in place because there'll be bedlam, especially amongst fighters, like fighters and rugby players, contact sport athletes and combat sport athletes, fucking crazy, like, you know, so you need to keep some sort of, you know, direction and rules here. So that it's great to hear that, and that, you know, people are taking it on. And I hope more people do. We got like heaps of stuff free on the website that people can read about this stuff, or obviously listen to this podcast. These are easy things you can do. But you make an interesting point about maybe it did play a factor, maybe it didn't, but it was inside our control and we could have optimized it. And that's what we want to try and do. We want to control as many variables as possible. Like I always think as an athlete, regardless of your sport, the one thing's inside your control is your own strength and conditioning. That's like your aerobic capacity, your strength and conditioning. That's all inside your control. That's 100%. So you need to be any fighter, any athlete that gasses. It's, you know, I just don't think that's acceptable personally. I think it's inside your control. You should be ready for it. Skill wise, being the better person on the night, fair enough. But these things are all inside your control. And we've all probably looked at fights and went, this dude is not in shape for this fight. With the exception of people taking a fight on like 5 days notice, you know, things like that. But in general, and I know injuries happen and so on, but yeah, these are things that are inside your control. And again, I'm not trying to disparage athletes. I'm not a professional athlete, you know, fair play to them and do crazy shit, and I wouldn't do it. But I just think, you know, it needs to be a bit more focused on what's inside your remit of your control and worry less about other things. And I think that's where then, you know, working with people around sleep and performance can be key, because it's managing media, managing when you do interviews. We seem to have this reluctance to say no to media at the high end, whereas you don't have to say no, but you can say, I'll do the media, but it's only during these times. These other times are sacrosanct. I'm not touching them. Like you were saying about the embedded thing. You can say, do not come to my room between 9 p.m. and 6 a.m. I can see media between 6 and 8 o'clock and maybe 2 and 4 o'clock in the afternoon. That's fine. Other than that, lads, I'm focused on the fight. You know, it needs to be a balance between the whole lot. Or if you are getting pulled in by the UFC or Bellator or other organizations to do media, get the fuck out of there then straight away. You don't have to sit around, you know, doing things. I know you want to say hello to the fans and sign a few things, but you don't have to sit around like backstage shooting the shit with other people. Just get out of there and focus on what you're there to do that week. It's easy to do. I've done it before races as well, staying up, talking to people, you know, socializing, whatever it is. And it's easy to do because you're kind of around like-minded people and it's kind of nice, but you got to focus on kind of what you're there for at the end of the day and what you're trying to achieve.
Ian, I'd love to get your thoughts on this. And I'm going to wind it back for when you were training, say for Leadville or one of the other 20 ultra marathons that you were doing. And I'm going to speak from my own experience, just purely from all the other training I've played, you know, played rugby at a very high level coming up. There was set training. I didn't think the training load it was tough, but not that bad. Then I got into combat sports, boxing. Yeah, training load was hard. Then moved into jiu-jitsu, MMA. Training load was okay. Intensity very hard. Something that has really shocked me to the system and taken me quite a bit of time to get used to in the ultra endurance world is the volume, and just pure the volume that you need to do to get your legs used to running these distances. Let's say, what I want to ask you is, how do you balance all of this then? If we've got all these other things, and say, like you're saying, when you're in Montreal, it's funny because I was on Christmas Day, had the exact same problem, negative 30 degrees, and said, I got to get 20 Ks in. 30 Ks I actually have to do, and I couldn't feel my legs for 2 days. But how do you balance all of this? How do you balance, okay, I've got to train. Say I've got to go for a 30K run in the morning. Let's say you're just plodding along, you're not breaking distances. Say you're doing 6-minute Ks, 3 hours there. And then I've got to do some mobility afterwards. I've got to go home. I've got to say, go to my job 9 to 5 or whatever. And then I've got to do, say, strength conditioning session at night. How do you balance this and sleep and decide, okay, I need to set this time away for sleep, and how much sleep do I really need to get? How do you go about that?
I'm not going to lie to you, Jordan. It was hard. It was very difficult. I did it for about 10 years and it took its toll on me. I ended up basically I dropped down to 50K runs and I just stopped because I was just completely exhausted from doing them. I won't lie. Had enough. And then I did some ultramarathon swims. I did 20K swims then. So I was looking for a different challenge, and obviously swimming is a bit more gentle on the body. And I'm turning 44 this year, so it's kind of getting a bit harder as you get older to maintain that sort of training volumes. So when I started doing them, I was obviously sort of around, I think, 30 years of age. And And it was very difficult at the time. I was working in a mining company and I was traveling internationally as well. So it was difficult. I also have the great fortune of being supported by an awesome wife who allows me to do these crazy things. And we don't have any kids. So that's the other thing as well. But it was hard. It was sometimes I would split my training. So I would train in the morning before work and then after work as well. There was times when I would do just weird shit. Like I live 12 Ks from the beach. So I get home from work, I'd have a small snack, I'd pack my backpack and I'd run to the beach 12 Ks. Then I get into the water because it was so hot here in Perth. I kind of body surf, play around for half an hour and I get back out, dry myself and run home to 12 Ks. So that could take like, the good to 3 hours to do that. So it was like 7 or 8 o'clock getting home at night. And then trying to sleep was difficult as well after that. So I ended up actually giving up alcohol in 2012 to help me actually focus on my recovery. I never ended up drinking again because of it, just because of how good I felt. So I completely eliminated alcohol, made a lot of changes to my diet, dialed in my sleep a lot more. I also looked at not trying to be an ultra runner completely across the year. I would kind of break my year into 2 phases. One was ultra running season and one was more on jiu-jitsu and strength. So I tried to rebuild in the time off. So I generally got up to like 79, 80 kilos. I would lift weights. I would do more jiu-jitsu. And then when I ran, I might only do jiu-jitsu once or twice a week. But I did find that my jiu-jitsu severely was impacted because it was like a white and blue belt at the time. So you were relying a lot on strength. And I got down like really light to 73 kilos and I just felt as weak as a kitten. I feel like when I get below 76 kilos, I lose strength. I feel like sort of 77 to 79 or 80 is perfect for me. I've been 5'10" and a strength kind of combo. So that was definitely affected. And also as well, I tried to increase progressively my training load. So I didn't want to go out in the first week and go, right, I got 6 months to this ultra marathon. Week 1, I'm going to run 100 Ks. It's like, it wasn't like that. I progressively wanted to increase my kilometers per week by no more than 10%. So my training load. The other thing I was looking for as well, because I was training for mountain ultras, I was looking for variation in ascent and descent. So I had to make sure I was getting elevation change in. And then I was working on basically one big long run a week. So during the week, like I might do like a 12K run on a Monday. Tuesday might be, at the time I lived near what's called Jacob's Ladder. It's like 200 and something steps in Perth and you can run up and down that. And that was great for elevation change. And I would do that actually carrying kettlebells sometimes as well. And that was really helpful too. And then on a Wednesday, I might go and run 20 Ks. And then on a Thursday, it might be jiu-jitsu. And then a Friday, it might be, 20 Ks. And then on a Saturday, I might go and do like a 2, 3, 4, 5 hour run, depending on where I was in my training cycle. But for a 100K run, I very rarely went over 100 Ks a week. It was the average weekly mileage or kilometerage was up around sort of 70 to 80. And I was looking for variation every day and progressive increase and with elevation change as well. And then replicating conditions of the race, because lots of the ones I did was carrying a backpack. So carrying that gear as well. And then would maybe use some smaller runs to warm up, to get ready for that. So, which is quite funny because years ago I thought like running a marathon was great. And then we got out like on a Saturday running 60 K as a training run or using a marathon as a training cycle. It was weird, like to get to that level so quick. So that was all kind of how I manage it. I have to say though as well, Jordan, that I am blessed with a VO2 max. My VO2 max is 70. And
wow,
I'm absolutely blessed with it. It's just, as you know, it's genetic. Most people can't really improve their VO2 max by more than 10%, and it's genetic. And I found out actually a few years ago, on my dad's side, that my grandfather used to run races in the army, running from barracks to barracks, like 10 and 20 mile runs, and he used to win them. So it's obviously something in the blood. So that's another part as well. So I'm blessed with good genetics. I'm blessed with really good. I got nice thick quads and an ass, and my feet are designed for running. So when I ran Leadville, I didn't even get one blister.
Jesus.
Yeah, not even a blister or a hot spot. It's actually quite freaky. But then when it comes to strength training, forget about it. Like I can't get really strong or jacked or have a six pack. I just not designed that way. I'm more like I'm definitely built for endurance type. And when I transferred over to swimming, it was the same as well. Even though I had high bone density from running, once I got kind of my swimming technique down, I was able to transfer that and be able to do like a 10K swim within a year and a 20K swim within 2 years. I definitely have the engine for it, which helps in jiu-jitsu, because in jiu-jitsu, I'm that type of guy is we roll around and you're all over me. And I go, want to keep going, do another round? And generally then in the second round, I'll be able to come back. So I'd be probably more like if you talk about athlete kind of archetypes, I'd be more like a Nick or Nate Diaz. I'd be able to go longer, but I wouldn't be a big strong guy, you know, but it's more in that longevity. So yeah, not to say I'm on the same par as Nick or Nate Diaz, but that's the sort of kind of person I am. I just can keep kind of tipping away for hours on end. So yeah.
Because this is an interesting chat. And I think doing the ultra endurance training and running these races has opened my eyes up so much. And I often think, okay, how do we balance all these? And when we're talking to, say, athletes or just everyday people who say, I want to run a marathon, but that's always their first question is, I don't know how I'm going to balance all of this. Did you notice that you had to take your sleep more serious, or as you were training more, like you had to bank more sleep, for lack of a better term, to make up for the recovery?
100%. I had to focus more on mobility. I'm not very flexible as a human. I'm a white, pasty Irish guy. If I'm not sitting in lotus position like Eddie Bravo on the ground or anybody else, I'm really stiff and rigid through my hips. So I had to focus on mobility, had to focus on sleep, I had to say no to going out to things. I had to get up at like 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning. Had to plan that like with my wife. I had to like have naps during the day on the weekend, or even sometimes after work, I come home at 4 o'clock and crash for half an hour, be so done. It was tough. And it's hard to balance. And I can't give anybody the silver bullet to it, because everybody's life is going to be different. But what I would say is that if you're going to do something like that, sit down with your partner and plan. And if you don't have a partner, sit down and plan for yourself. Because if you don't plan it, it'll never happen. And you need to be on the same page. You need the support of your family and friends around you to allow you. You don't want to be getting nagged on a Friday evening going, oh, we're going to Jane and Joe's for drinks, and you said you were going to go, and you want to go on a 30-mile run in the morning. We can't go out. So that thing needs to be kind of planned. But also as well, don't be afraid to take a weekend off and go, you know what, I actually do want to go around to Jane and Joe's and have a few drinks and just fucking chill out and sleep in tomorrow as well. You know? And so I would do that as well, where I would take time off or take a break, or go, you know what, actually on Saturday, what I'm going to do, instead of getting up early in the morning, because I'm training for an ultra endurance event where I'm going to run up to 24 hours, I'm actually going to go out and run at night. So that's another thing we used to do as well. Is go like a few of us go at 8 o'clock at night and run to midnight. Or sometimes can we replicate those conditions coming up towards the event, like what you do with a fighter, and say, right, we're going to go out at midnight and we're going to run and walk till 6 o'clock in the morning. Nice and easy, but just to get ourselves going through that period of maybe seeing the sun come up the next morning. Because like when I ran Leadville, it was 27 hours and 42 minutes. That's a long time in your feet with no sleep. And so, seeing the sun come up again the next day and you're coming into the town it's quite weird. So you want to try and replicate those conditions as much as possible, just like you would do for a fighter or any other event.
And I guess that's an interesting point too. If you're doing that and you are doing the overnight runs, which are common, like in this kind of space, how do you say, if you're doing that in your training week, how urgent is it to say get back to your sleep cycle then the next day? Say if you do that and you finish your run at 6 a.m., is it best to just battle through it and then go back into your normal cycle, or do you have a nap, or how do you go about it?
Yeah, so what I would say to people, obviously you don't really do that on a weekday. Like don't try and go to work then the next day. Obviously, you want to do it when you're having a day off, because I've seen some people do that before. And they're like, "But you said practice." Yeah, not on the fucking night, on a Monday night. So do it like on a Friday night or a Saturday night where you got the next day off. If you're a 9 to 5 Monday to Friday worker, what I would say is you're best off if you do finish, let's say at 6 o'clock in the morning, and you've rehydrated and had something to eat. Generally get a 3 or 4 hours sleep and then get up straight away, because you want to get back into that daytime cycle. What you don't want to do is sleep all day and then not be able to sleep. So for example, if we said we went out on a Saturday night and we did that sort of run walk from midnight till 6 o'clock in the morning, and you came home, had some food, rehydrated, and it was 8 a.m. and you were really tired, maybe sleep till 11 or 12 and then get up and then power through the day. What you don't want to do is go to bed at 8 o'clock in the morning and sleep right through till 4 p.m. because you won't be able to sleep that night. And then you're going to be completely desynchronized for a few days. So you're going to have to go through kind of a bit of a shitty day. And so you might need some caffeine in the afternoon to get you through it. The other thing I'd say is exercise a bit of caution around this as well. Don't jump in the car and say, right, we're going to go on a bit of a drive because it's Sunday afternoon, or, just kind of do what I call donkey tasks where you don't really think, and there's not going to be any risk to you. So do kind of stupid things at home where you don't have to be really engaged, and, just chill out. If you're having a barbecue at home, maybe that's a good time to do that, or whatever it might be.
Because this is one of the last questions before I let you go, Dr. Ian. And I think it's a good point, especially if there are athletes listening, and even hearing you talk about this is, I guess you have the theoretical framework of what, say, is like a perfect model, right? And say if you got 8 to 10 hours of sleep and you had the perfect sleep cycles, and you figured out if you're a if you're a morning person or a night person, you could do all that. But like this, like you just said, sometimes in these training blocks, you have to do an overnight run. You have to do it. It's far from perfect, but you just have to get it in. Would you say that it's to be expected? Like you can't be expected to like everything else, you can't be expected to get perfect sleep every single time, or within a training block, you can't be getting perfect sleep every time. And there is this kind of buffer zone.
Oh, 100%, Jordan. I think that's probably where some people come unstuck with whereabouts. Like, I had a bad night's sleep. What am I going to do? Relax, man. We go through bad periods. Life isn't plain sailing. We have this kind of idea that everything should be, vanilla ice cream every day and it's perfect and rainbows and bliss and ponies. Like, it's not. You're going to go through. Like a couple of weeks ago, I went through about 10 nights of shit sleep where it was driving me crazy, and I just could not get myself into a good routine. For some reason or another, I kept waking up. I'd fall asleep at night, 10 o'clock. I'd be like, this is night. I fell asleep. I'd be awake at 11. I'd be awake from 11 till 2 a.m. Just could not for the life of me figure out what it was. So I started making some changes about, and I was around the time the Ukraine-Russia thing was kicking off. So I was probably watching the news too late in the evening or reading stuff about it. And so I was probably those type of things are on my mind. So I removed those type of things. That really helped. But I think, yeah, it's normal to have shitty night's sleep every now and then. And like with training as well, Jordan, we all got to eat some shit every now and then. It's what keeps us in check, right? I think too often we think everything's going to be plain sailing. So going through these bad periods, trying to replicate bad periods is actually good for us because we see the kind of character we are. And one of the things, like, and I don't want to start sounding like a psychologist here, but I'd be interested to talk to you after you do your 100K run, because for me, after doing it for a number of years, I found out a lot about myself. That is like a forced meditation. You're in your head, and the conversations you have in your own head, it's like that little devil and angel on one side. Like one side's going, look, man, 70K's in, you've done enough. You're not built for this. You're weak. These people are real runners. You're not. You're just trying to prove something. You're a pussy, really. Just give up. Drop out the next checkpoint. Then the other guy's going, don't listen to him. Keep running. You always you don't want to be a pussy. If you finish now, you'll be a pussy for the rest of your life. You always quit. Blah. This goes on in your head continually. And you're constantly going to be fighting with yourself. And then you get through it. And then you look back and you think to yourself, why did I have so much self-doubt? Because it actually wasn't that bad.
Yeah, I talk about this and I explain it to people like you meet the mofo or you meet the motherfucker inside your mind. And it's that guy, you see that guy, and it's the guy that's always questioning. Whenever you think you should do something and you get that self-doubt and you get that second question, that's the guy you're going to meet when you're deep in these runs and you're going really hard. And that it's exactly what you're saying. He's going to be the one saying, stop, you're hurting, your legs are sore, keep going. And then you just go, you got to battle that guy. And the more time you spend with that guy, I find the better you are when you're not with him.
Yeah, I agree. And I think this is like, I call him the internal saboteur. And Carl Jung talks about, the shadow. And, we've all, like you and I, both run our own businesses. We're responsible for our own income. I'm sure you and I definitely did. I'm sure you did as well. Had thought you were like, I can't do this business anymore. I'm not making enough money. I can't do it. I'm just going to get a job working for someone else, taking away this stress. We've all gone through periods that I don't think there's any business owner that doesn't. And especially during hard times like coronavirus or GFCs or, financial markets or fighters like leaving you or clients leaving you or prices, this and that and the other. You're like, this is just way too hard. I'm freaking out. I'm never going to be able to make it. We all have it. It's the internal saboteur. It's the same little fucker that's in your head when you're running. It's the same fucker that's in your head when you're stuck under side control of jiu-jitsu and you're getting mauled by someone that's bigger than you, younger than you, and is a blue belt. And you're lying there going, I'm not a black belt. I can't deal with this. But you have to breathe, relax, work your way out of it and deal with it, because every time you do, you learn something more about yourself. It sounds like a psychologist, an old cliche and like some sort of just taking what other people say, but John Kavanagh says it, you win or you learn. And I actually find that every time I lose or I make a mistake or something happens in business, that's where I really solidify my thinking about something, or I go off on a tangent learning about something. That's where I've had my biggest breakthroughs in my life. In the DNFs, the did not finishes, that's where, where I've got mauled by people. That's where I really had my breakthroughs. And I think using that darkness or that internal saboteur can be really beneficial about making you a better person, embracing that negativity, that little asshole, that demon that lives inside you, and beating him down every single time. Let him say what he has to say, but you don't have to follow his advice.
Yeah, that's exactly what I want to do with this new podcast, is talk about this, because I am fortunate enough, I get to hang around with what I call high performers. Like I get to hang around with people like yourself, world-renowned expert, really, really respected businessmen, really successful businessmen, world champions, Olympic gold medalists. We get to hang out with all these different people. And I find that it is that type of mindset, isn't it? And it's that mindset of going after the adversity and actively going to find it. And one of the guys on our team talks about, especially with the ultra runners, is they're always looking for the wall. They're looking to find the wall to challenge themselves. And you see that with people who are really successful in other areas of life. They're always looking for that challenge. So it's not this abrupt thing that they don't expect when it happens, and they're looking for it. They're looking for the next challenge, and you see it. And what I want to ask you is, does it seep into the rest of your life? Like doing these things when you're running the business and you're building up that business through the hard times, or you go through the belt system in jiu-jitsu and get a black belt, or when you finish Leadville, one of the most renowned races in the world, does that seep into the rest of your life? And do you find success because of those things?
Yeah, I often sometimes will sit in front of a group of like shift workers in a mining company, and I'm talking to them, and they're like, this is fucking bullshit, blah, 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 sleep and blah, blah, blah. And I'm thinking to myself, oh yeah, what are these guys going to do to me? That, one of my training partners who was like a 95 kilo, second degree black belt, Mary bloke that absolutely going to choke my head off and crack me open like a lobster. Like, I've been there. Like, what are these guys going to do? Or when I'm dealing with unions and they're screaming and roaring at me, or guys are insinuating physical violence, I'm like, okay, if it happens, it happens. Like, I've been in worse, I get my head boxed off me twice a week by bigger, stronger, younger guys. Because of being in adversity, it makes me comfortable with it. But also as well, it makes me avoid it as well, because when it starts, I just walk away from it. So that's good in that respect. But I also think about the physical informs the mental, and also the cognitive informs the physical. So when I am sort of struggling in jiu-jitsu, I think to myself, wait, no, you've been successful in other parts of your life. Like, you've worked in like whatever it might be. You give yourself a little pat in the back and you kind of go, I've worked in Formula One, Super Rugby, worked with these athletes, blah, blah. You can solve this problem, Ian. You can solve this. This guy might be bigger and younger, but you have the cognitive tools to solve this. You need to sit back and analyze what's going wrong. You're too passive, you're too this, you're too whatever. So it definitely comes into one. What this often reminds me of, Jordan, is a book called The Book of Five Rings. Have you read this book?
No, but I have heard you talk about it before.
So I've got another podcast called Learning to Die, where we discuss philosophy, history, and societal things. And we've spoken about the Book of Five Rings. We actually did some episodes breaking down some of the chapters, and we had Sonny Brown on as well, talking about how this applies to fight sports. And one of the things that Miyamoto Musashi, a famous swordsman, said in the Book of Five Rings is that there are more ways to the top of the mountain. So there's multiple paths to the top of the mountain. And also what he said, which I think is the best quote of my life: once you see the way in one thing, you see it in everything. So if you're a master potter, gardener, swordsman, martial artist, if you can get to that level, you can see it in everything else. You just know the path that's there. So this is really important. I'd highly recommend that book to anybody. The Book of Five Rings. You can download it free as a PDF on the internet. Absolutely brilliant book. It's been my top 5 philosophy books of all time. The Book of Five Rings, Miyamoto Musashi.
I was going to say, I'm just writing that quote down. I might stick that up on the quote wall. But all right, Dr. Dunican, last 2 questions I want to ask you before I let you go. Obviously, we're talking a lot about sleep, but sleep is part of the puzzle. I always talk about when we talk about performance or just human health and fitness. It's like that picture of all the scientists who are blindfolded touching the elephant, and they're all touching different parts of the elephant, and they all think that their own discipline is their own, but it's all encompassing. It's all one thing. I want to ask you, when it comes to sleep and it comes to performance, 2 questions. What are your absolute no-nos that not just athletes, that everyone should be doing, absolute no-nos when it comes to sleep? And then what are your absolute must-dos that people should be doing to optimize their sleep and then their overall health, well-being, and performance?
Ooh, that's a good question. Your analogy about the scientist on the elephant is really interesting. And I think you're right. If you look at kind of the work that I do and my background, I'm always looking for the interconnectedness or interdisciplinary stuff. Whilst I might be viewed as an expert in sleep, I'm actually more of a generalist than I am an expert, which was pointed out to me by a friend of mine recently. Where I thought I was being a technicalist. We said, no, you're actually a generalist because you're looking for it in everything. And that's why I try to go across multiple domains. In saying that, what's the non-negotiables, or what's the no-nos that people should do in regards to sleep? Oh, wow. That's a good one. I suppose one of the biggest no-nos I'd say at the moment, actually, Jordan, that keeps popping up, is stop using marijuana for sleep. That's one of the ones I keep hearing, and it's because of people listening to Joe Rogan and other podcasts as well. Look, marijuana has THC and CBD. CBD helps with sleep, but THC doesn't. It actually ruins your sleep and inhibits REM sleep, which we spoke about earlier on, and it causes a lot of issues. Now, when people come off of it, they have crazy dreams for up to 6 months called REM rebound, and this has got to do with long-term pot smoking. So don't think that, especially in the athletic population, I'm seeing this getting more and more because there's more and more talk about CBD, and CBD, and people are thinking this is this catch-all thing for, let's just smoke weed and it'll help my sleep. So just be careful of that one, I would say. That's a no-no, I would say, at the moment. And the must-dos, I'd say, is routine. It's boring, but a regular routine for sleep can really be beneficial. And what I mean is basically going to bed at the same time and getting up every day at the same time as well. So potentially like going to bed at 10:30, falling asleep at 11, getting up next morning at 7 or 7:30. If you can do that 7 days of the week, you can have massive improvements with that routine and regularity. It's simple, it's boring, but very, very effective. So that's where I always start with people, is try to get some normality into their sleep routine. Jordan Peterson spoke about this recently on a podcast as well. When he was seeing individuals, one of the things he would try to do was get some normality around the sleep cycle, because once you can get your sleep cycle in order, then we can start working on sort of the mental health part, the physical, all these things hang off of this. So it's really important to get that kind of basis in place. But also, if people have trouble with that, and it's timing of training and so on, like we're saying, like the nighttime runs with ultramarathons, then we might have to reverse those principles and do something different. So there's obviously, it goes both ways, but routine, it's boring. And like the Jocko thing, discipline equals freedom. Get yourself into a good routine and it'll really, really help you.
All excellent points. Very last question I want to ask Dr. Reid Reel, a big mentor of mine. He's taught me a lot. He's also choked me out a lot and beat me up a lot over the years.
He's a scumbag.
Both of you guys are BJJ black belts.
Yeah.
He is a scumbag. He is a scumbag. If there's a no bars hold, no time limit, wrestling match, your shirt doesn't have to be on. We're talking sweaty. Grips are going to be hard. Who comes out alive between you and Dr. Reid Reel?
People have been talking about this for years, Jordan. They call it the dad bod versus the young Hulk. But what can I say? I'm going to back myself up here. He's obviously afraid. The man finished his Ph.D. He ran to the US and worked for Gatorade. He fled. He then went to China. He went to a different country. Like, again, he's got no faith and he can't come back here. I met him in Germany for a conference. We went to a luta livre school and we trained. He wouldn't even enroll me. What more can I say? I was only a purple belt at the time. He was a black belt. What can I say? The man has dodged me. He's got 20 kilos on me. He's got about 10 years or more on me. He's dodging me. But like, this is where he's afraid of the mental battle. Yes, if he gets into side control, he's got a good chance. But if I can keep my butterfly hooks in, I can keep a Z-guard on him, I'm going to heel hook him. I'm taking that leg home, Jordan. That's all I'm going to say. Where are you at, Reid? Where are you at?
If you want to see that, then message, comment. I think we could probably get some funding through. We could get a super match going. I think I could probably get some television rights. We could stream it. We could put it on Twitch. Who knows? The possibilities are endless.
You know, the problem with that, Jordan, is if that actually happened, I would probably be convulsing laughing so much that he would tap me in about 4 seconds.
We'd have to rig it though. We'd have to rig it somehow. But anyway, Doctor.
Before we go, can I make some things here?
Sure.
Can I put up a few plugs here? So first of all, talking about sleep disorders, we released a blog on our website today, which is based upon something which I don't think we touched on in this episode, but it's based upon sleep disorders, and it's one of those 70, and it's called Rapid Eye Movement Behavior Disorder. And I've called it Rapid Eye Movement Disorder in Combat and Contact Sport Athletes, Implications for Athletes. This is something that Michael Bisping actually spoke about recently on Joe Rogan from about 5 minutes in to 8 minutes in. And it's something that is quite a significant sleep disorder that people might be experiencing. So we wrote a blog on that, talking about the background of REM behavior disorder and the implications for performance and long-term health. So that's one of our most recent things that's gone out there. And then the final thing is we have a website called Combat Sports Science, which I will give you the link, Jordan, if you wouldn't mind putting into the show notes. Myself, Reed in Shanghai, who's the UFC manager there for dietitian and I think dietetics and research, and Dr. Andy Galpin, who we've had on the podcast as well. We've got together and we've launched a survey through Cal State Fullerton, which is looking at basically sleep and nutrition practices of all combat athletes. So this is like from karate and qigong and all sorts, all the way through to MMA. And we're looking for any athlete possible, amateur, recreational. If you do karate twice a week, or you want to go down and do jiu-jitsu twice a week, we're looking for you to fill in the survey. Now, the benefit on this survey is it takes about 20 minutes. You get an individualized PDF report emailed to you within 20 minutes. So once you finish it, you will get into your inbox a personalized report about your risk factors. And some of those risk factors are what we spoke about today in this podcast. So you get a free report there if you want to go and have a look. And we're going to use that data then to basically write some papers out there for the combat sports community to try and influence the further research and also to characterize what's happening, so we can maybe put some tailored or targeted interventions around education and personalization to these athletes as well. So we'd really welcome anybody there that's any way, shape, way, or form touching combat sports. If you could go and fill in that survey for us, we'd really appreciate. Help us make combat sports great again.
That was www.combatsportscience.com. Hey, Ian.
Yeah. Now I need to get the wording right, so I'll just double check, because I actually got this wrong myself last week, because I think it's a combat sports. So it's combat sports, plural, science.com. All
right, excellent. So everyone, if you are listening to this, you are a combat athlete. And if you follow my work or you like what I do, Reed, who is the nutrition side of this, has pretty much taught me everything I know about nutrition. Everything that I do sleep-wise with our athletes, from our top-level UFC to Olympic athletes to CEOs, I've pretty much taken from Ian. And Andy has consumed up far too much of my time watching his YouTube. So these are pretty much the three men that I steal all their ideas from anyway. So if you could go do this and go do this survey, it would help me a lot as well. And it'll help the whole combat sports community, because we need this more info. And as much as we know about combat sports, about the science, it's this baseline information we don't have a lot of. We don't have a lot of survey information of just what do combat sports athletes do. And it doesn't take long. It'll take, 20 minutes, Ian? 20 minutes or so? 20 minutes or so, and then help us understand it. And when we say help us help you, that's true, because we can do all of these things, but we need this baseline data to get into the complex things. So if you have a spare 20 minutes, I couldn't encourage you more to go to that website and do that.
And we're not getting funded for the study, Jordan. This is partly funded through my business. Reed and Andy give them their own free time because they're just combat sports enthusiasts. We're not getting paid for this. We're not getting any funding for this. So we're really doing this off the back of our own backs for the love of the sport. It really is like that. So, any help you can give us towards our plugging or sharing around, really appreciate. So let everybody know. The more we get, the better it's going to be. The more data points, the better we can do this. Also as well, Jordan, if people do want to check out more of the stuff that we have to offer, there's kind of three areas you can get me on. One is Melius Consulting. That's where we work with companies around shift work, occupational health, education, design and fitness work systems, integration of technology, and so on. So I got a background there in engineering and business as well. So we do a lot of this health variables into businesses. We work with mining companies, oil and gas, rail, aviation, and so on. The other part then is sleep for performance, obviously, which we mentioned earlier on. There's a free podcast up there, over 100 podcast episodes, multiple blogs. You can access all my research there as well. You can ask questions. You can book in for consults as well if you wish. And then if you're interested in some of my ranting and ravings, I have a website called learningtodie.com.au. Myself, my co-host, Kieran O'Regan, who's an ex-professional fighter in Ireland. We talk about philosophy, history, society, all these type of things. We actually have a podcast episode coming out today with Rob Wolf, who was recently on Joe Rogan. So we've had Rob on, and we've had multiple other episodes on where we've done kind of reflection episodes on things like Ukraine. We've spoken to Dr. Rachel Menzies, who's written a book on how to die here in Australia. So we've got about 29 episodes up there. So if people want to go over there, that's just me and Kieran ranting and raving with different guests about philosophy and so on. Very focused on how to live a better life. We're not philosophers or psychologists. We're just interested in having these discussions. So they're the three areas that people can hit me up. And if you're a scientist and you want to see my research, you can go to PubMed or Google Scholar, and all my stuff is up there. Or you can email me as well.
And what are your socials, Ian, if people want to follow you on the social media?
So yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. Generally use that for a lot of business stuff, obviously. So you can connect me over there. I'm on Instagram at Sleep for Perform, on Twitter as well at Sleep for Perform. And they're mainly the ones I do. So Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. They're the three main ones. Don't do Facebook anymore. There was too many scientists on Facebook, so I had to get off. Too many educated people.
Yeah, fair enough. I think I might follow suit, but I could not encourage you more. If this is an area, like we said, sleep is a massive area, and performance as a whole is all encompassing. There's so many things that make up performance, but sleep is the foundation to all of that. So if you do have questions, I couldn't encourage you more to get in contact with Dr. Ian Dunican. But Ian, always a pleasure, mate, to chat to you, and I'm sure we'll do it again soon.
Great. Thanks, Jordan.